Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the PSI Effect Podcast. I am Neug. I'm here with Franky, and we are your hosts here in this space. Glad to have you here today. We have an interesting conversation for you. Today, we're going to be talking about spontaneity. And for some folks who have already grasped that concept, good for you. And for those of you who are kind of scratching your head, wondering what does that have to do with the pause, shift, and ignite of the PSI Effect Podcast, you just got to stay tuned, and we're going to jump into it. But as always, before we do that, you always check in with Franky to see what's going on. Franky, what's happening besides the heat, brother? The heat is on.
The heat is on and popping. My goodness, I thought we were past the sweltering desert temperatures, but they have returned. And but yeah, I'll deal with it. I had mentioned in a previous episode I was concerned about the HVAC system at the house failing and what a terrible time it would be for it to fail. But had some folks out yesterday. They checked it out. Everything's good to go. So I'm going to crank that thing down. And, I want it to be to the point where I got to wear a hoodie in the house. It's so cool in here. So yeah, we're doing fine in that regard. But outside of that, I have to say, I am definitely enjoying summer. Summer has been very enjoyable for me just across the board, with work, with plenty of periods of time for relaxation. This past weekend, I made a trip down to Atlanta to spend some time with friends and fraternity brothers down that way. So there'll be some more cool stuff that comes out of that a little bit later. But yeah, it's just enjoying the moment, trying to be present in the moment. And as always, we're, another week closer to me having to drop my oldest son off at college. So in countdown mode.
Yeah. Well, we're thinking about you going through that. I know there's a lot of folks in the audience who have probably experienced that already and may be embarking on the same journey that you're embarking on. So, our thoughts go out to all of you who have that challenge that you're coming up on yet this year. So with that, we're going to jump into the conversation. We're talking about spontaneity and how that ties into what our framework is here on the PSI Effect Podcast. And so, we're going to start off by just making a statement about how we've been conditioned to believe that, success requires scheduling every minute of your day. Right? You always got to be doing something every single minute of the day. And some of us just live and die by that calendar. And so, doing so has some pros and cons, I guess, in the whole scheme of things when you look at, scheduling and what spontaneity means. And so I think a lot of us may think or feel, or even society has made us feel that spontaneity means that you're, reckless or, even lazy if you come up off that schedule, right? But it really doesn't have to be that way. What do you think?
I do believe there is a myth about capacity. But as people, we consider ourselves to have capacity. We hear about this a lot in business too. Capacity. How much can you get done? And the myth is that if you're not using 100% of your capacity, it's wasteful. And I want to be one of the first to say it. You've alluded to it, but I want to go on record saying that is the ultimate myth. 100% utilization of your capacity at all times is not a recipe for long-term success. It might work in the short term. We might have storms and things that we need to surge through where we're using 100% capacity, but in the long term, we're just going to burn ourselves out. The analogy I like to make is you think about the fire department in a town. Right? If the fire department was using 100% of its capacity all the time, that's not a good situation for that town because that means the whole damn town is on fire and burning down. Right. So when we look at it through that lens, we need to make sure that we're smartly using our capacity, but we don't have to use all of it at all the time, because if we don't leave room for spontaneity, guess what? We're not leaving room for growth, for exploration, for curiosity.
Yeah. And, adhering to the calendar in such a rigid manner that rigidity, it may protect you from a few things, a few failures, but it also isolates you from really experiencing some things in life that would maybe bring you joy and even bring you peace. Because you need that time to reflect. You need that time to go inside and do your inventories, right? You have to do that inner work, from time to time. And I would probably say more than time to time, probably on a very regular basis, you have to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but taking a break from that plan doesn't mean that you're lazy, right? You just have to be strategic, I think, and take some time just to restore your mental being, your mental flexibility. And I think that's what the whole spontaneity conversation really how it really points us in that direction.
And at the same time, we also have to recognize that the full calendar hasn't just been stigmatized as a way of saying I'm successful, I'm valuable.
Mhm.
In many regards, it's become a shield. We're in our day-to-day activity, that calendar can be a shield. Like, oh nope, I don't have time for that. I don't have any capacity for that. And that calendar becomes yet another wall of the comfort zone boxing us in, that makes us say no to all these other things that would cause us to expand and grow and explore. And yet we stick to the script, for lack of a better term, and we don't deviate.
Yeah, and further proof of what you're just talking about there, Frankie, is that there's things that happen that are unexpected,
Mhm.
that are not on the calendar anyway. And
Right.
so you got to pivot, you got to make adjustments in order to deal with some of those types of things. And so, leaving zero room on your calendar for that flexibility, um, I think really kind of trips you up and sets you up for some things that you may not, want to deal with. I know when I was in the business world working every day, I mean, I had my calendar. I had certain things that I wanted to do. I had certain things that were, I don't want to say forced upon me, but certain things that were in my area of responsibility that I was required to do.
Mhm.
And there was very little room left for those things that would happen. Something would just hijack your calendar. I mean, heck, my boss would hijack my calendar.
Right.
Um, and so then what, right? Now, I'm not saying that some of those situations did not bring um, some good result in some of the efforts that we were tasked with. But I'm just making a point that you have to be flexible with that calendar, and I guess it's a balance too, because with that flexibility, you don't want to keep pushing things off till tomorrow because your calendar gets hijacked. You gotta manage that process. And so that whole spontaneity piece, while on one side it may sound like fun to be spontaneous, on the other side it might be a little stressful for some folks to think about even going off script.
I like the word you used there when you said balance, because, we have to have balance between this freestyle spontaneity and structure, right? There has to be that, we have to find that Goldilocks zone that's just right for us, and not just us as a person in totality, but for us at the moment that we need it. Because I would imagine that the needle moves back and forth as to where that balance point needs to be, depending on what we're dealing with. And, you mentioned the ripple effect, your boss coming in and hijacking your time. Then that causes a ripple effect of, well, I had all this other stuff I needed to do, and now that's getting bumped, and it causes this chain reaction. The more rigid our structure is, the more devastating that ripple effect will be.
Yeah, and just so our audience knows, we're not trashing the use of a calendar. And you alluded to that earlier as well.
Mhm.
Calendars are like a roadmap of the day. There's some folks in the audience here that can appreciate the fact of getting around and actually using a physical map versus the GPS that we have today.
They're
But
few and
you
far
map
between nowadays, though.
that is so true. Um, but you map out the day, right? It's just like taking a
Mhm.
trip. If you're looking at that map, there's certain places along the way that you could stop, but you don't have to, right? You have that flexibility to kind of maneuver that trip, that road trip, the way that you feel. And I think the same is true for a calendar, where you just have to have that, flexibility to be able to negotiate different things that come up. So it is a good roadmap, because you have meetings, you have so many other things that you schedule. I mean, you probably even schedule, and if you don't, maybe your significant other, your partner might wish you would schedule a date night or some time to spend uninterrupted, with your partner. But I bet few of us, if any of us, actually have room on our calendar to just breathe and just do nothing but breathe. you know, Maybe meditate or something. But I bet few of us have that on our calendars, because we're just pushed. Society has just pushed us to feel like we got to have every moment, filled up with something to do. Otherwise, we're perceived as not being successful or not being productive if we don't have that calendar full.
And that's the myth. I mean, that's really what it is. That's the myth. We have to be intentional about our downtime. We have to leave room in our capacity for us to explore and grow. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. It's the same, in industry and the organizations that I've been at, and when I've coached people that were individual contributors, middle managers, all the way up to executive level. One of the things that I always harp on is that if you want continuous improvement to happen, you have to leave space for it to happen. And it's the same thing when we're talking about our calendar. Yes, we need to have that roadmap. It is absolutely essential that we have a map. But at the same time, we need to make sure there's enough flexibility in that map for us to pivot as we need to. And I think that's just part of getting past that myth.
Sure. And there's been research done that says that if you pursue novel exercises, that they can make you happier. They can, improve your, cognition, right? And improve your motivation, which it makes me think of, vacation time. People go on vacation, if they can actually enjoy themselves when they come back, they feel a little bit more, they feel a bit rejuvenated and ready to take on some tasks from a fresh perspective.
I think the key there, one key word that we need to add in there, is that if we habitually pursue that novel time, that free time. And that ties us back to our conversation when we talked about habits. We've got to get those reps in. It's not just going to be a switch that we flip and then we automatically start getting the benefits. We have to be intentional about making sure we're setting aside that time. And, I can attest to that, being able to fully unplug, being in the technology space, in the technology field. There's so many things that tether us to our jobs, that tether us to the responsibilities that we have. It is so easy for us to be on the other side of the planet, and somebody back in the office can reach you, in a matter of seconds. So being able to unplug and getting into the habit of being able to unplug at specified and deliberate periods of time is one of the keys to really gleaning the benefits of, pursuing this novelty that the research was suggesting.
Yeah, and I like what you said there, specified and deliberate, because if you're not deliberate about it, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to happen. Like you're talking about the habits, like any other habit, if you're not deliberate about it, it's not going to happen, and it's not going to do you any good.
Well, Nuge, talking about being deliberate, this notion of deliberation, again, that's one of those things that has to be in balance as well. Because if we're too deliberate about everything and we just want to deliberate about everything, we run into this, analysis paralysis. So we're looking at using our intuition versus this notion of deliberation. And there's more research out there looking at the differences between those two ends of the spectrum, where we're looking at cognitive psychologists doing work where, yes, you've got that gut feeling that's telling you all these things, but then we've got this very slow, thoughtful, deliberate process that we use to try to rationalize. And that's where that analysis paralysis can live. So as we're trying to strike that balance between spontaneity and structure, we have to make sure we're keeping this balance between using our intuition and versus using deliberation to navigate our path forward.
That's a very good description of deliberation there, sir. I like that. And when we think about that, there's you can. I already alluded to the fact, road trips and maps. But if you think about the highways versus the back roads when you're on that trip, The highway is actually your calendar, which gets you from point A to point B in a very effective manner, right?
Mhm.
Barring too many interruptions. But the back roads are where the spontaneity comes into play, where you actually get to, drive and enjoy the ride and find those hidden spots, or so you get to find joy in the process.
Mhm.
And that's where the spontaneity comes in, and it makes me think, all those years when I was riding a motorcycle, the main highway was, that was fine for getting you there quick, but the back roads, the back country roads, is where the real enjoyment, at least for me, of the ride really came in. So just think about that, highway versus back roads analogy when you're thinking about your spontaneity and managing the rigidity of that calendar.
Yeah, and one thing that this conversation is reminding me of right now, specifically as we were just talking about intuition and deliberation, it ties back to a conversation we had during our strengths episode.
Mhm.
The double-edged sword of strengths. We talked about, the two systems. There was work that Dr. Daniel Kahneman did. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, where we have two systems in our brain. We have the limbic system, which is fast, is where emotion lives. And then we have the prefrontal cortex, is where rationality lives. And that's, the exact manifestation of what we're talking about here with our intuition, our limbic system, versus the prefrontal cortex, which is the deliberation. And that intuitive piece, that intuition is always going to be faster. It's always going to fire first. So it's always going to have the first crack at influencing what we do. So if we let it, spontaneity can have space and lead the way for us.
Yeah, if we let it. And when you talk about gut reactions, that's the other thing is, if we pay attention to what
Mhm.
the gut is telling us, because a lot of times, I think we'll kind of brush it off, and we don't really pay attention to it until way later, and then we kick ourselves and say, I should have listened to my gut. We've said that, many times, I'm sure.
Whew. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Frankie, tell us, there's a difference apparently between, impulsiveness and spontaneity, or being spontaneous. Um,
Mhm.
what's the distinction between the two?
Well, at surface level, it may just be a difference in connotation. People may use those things interchangeably, and just one has a negative connotation and one has a neutral connotation. But even before we get into the specific definitions, this is something that we've done in several episodes where we get into to the actual definitions of words to make sure we're talking about the same things. And I think that's critically important. Words matter. What we say matters. So as we're getting into this, and that's not a new idea. There's biblical references to what
Mhm.
what words mean. Words matter. The mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. So what comes out of you is only what's already in you, type of thing. So words matter and definitions matter. And let me get off my soapbox, but impulsive versus spontaneous. So obviously, to me, impulsive seems to have the negative connotation. To me, that means there's a lack of restraint, a total lack of structure, fully emotionally driven, not necessarily considering what the outcome would be. That's my
Yes.
take on impulsive.
So impulsive is like, if you got this job and you go in on Tuesday and something happens and it really pisses you off and you just quit. That's
Yeah,
pretty impulsive.
and you don't think about the consequences of, oh man, I just lost my health insurance. So how am I going to pay rent? Or, how am I going to take care of my family? You're not thinking about the consequences of the action. You're just in the moment and you're like, boom, all right, I'm out.
Yeah. It comes down, when you come down from that,
Hmm.
all of those responsibilities kick in. And then you're like, crap, what did I just do?
Right, right. So the flip side of that, when we look at spontaneity, I think spontaneity is different because it still has the underlying structure of our core values, and there's rationality in there. But what it represents for me is the flexibility to deviate from your plotted course, to take
Mhm.
advantage of opportunities to learn, to grow, but you're still staying true to yourself and you have an eye forward to what the consequences of your actions would be.
Yeah, that spontaneity is really just I like that word and I like what it connotates because it gives you, as you said, the flexibility, but you can, just pivot, but
Mhm.
you're really doing it on your own terms because you don't really have to, but you can if you want to,
Right.
kind of thing. So I do like that. So, as we, finish up with that section or with that part of the conversation, I just ask the audience, to look at their own lives and look at what might be some of the symptoms that you have for falling into that calendar rigidity lifestyle, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think that you can do that, if you start by just thinking about if you block some time off, some personal time, some me time, some breathing time, how does that make you feel, right? Are you feeling anxious about doing that? Um, are you feeling, guilty about doing that? Then perhaps if you have that feeling that you should be doing something else, I mean, that might be a good sign that, you're really holding on a little tight to that
Mhm.
calendar and you might need to plan some of that breathe time.
Yeah, and I mean this is where we're pressing pause. We're definitely leaning into the pause right here when we do this self-assessment. I mean, and another question that we can ask ourselves is, are we likely to turn down opportunities to try new things just because we quote unquote don't have time? Like when our friends call us or family calls us, like, hey, I just got tickets to the Wu-Tang concert, or I just got tickets to, the football game. You want to come with me? Are you more inclined to say no just because it wasn't something that you had planned for? Do you not have the flexibility to work that in? You're missing out on these opportunities. That's an important question to ask.
Yeah, and then also looking at your calendar, if you start off, Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening and you're planning your week, or maybe you do it on Friday and you're looking at the week ahead
Mm.
and you're already tired just looking at the week ahead, right?
I feel called out, seen, and threatened all at the same time by your question that you're posing right now, sir.
I've been there. And sometimes I would look at the calendar going like, how in the world am I gonna get all this done? But that again is another indicator that, your calendar has you a little wrapped a little bit too tight. You might need to look at, scheduling a little differently from that point. So I mean, those are some symptoms that you can identify if you're very rigid in that calendar and not, making enough time for you and some of those things that are important to you in your life. And then again, I just want to reiterate the fact that, if you do that, it doesn't mean that you're lazy. It doesn't mean that you're unproductive. You have to look out for your mental health as well.
Paramount, absolutely paramount. Have to prioritize mental health. Again, we're not saying that calendars are intrinsically bad, but we do have to be honest with ourselves when we ask the question, are you running your schedule or is your schedule running you?
That's an honest question. And I'm real curious to know what our audience feels about that. So I'm just going to ask the audience now to, leave us a comment if your schedule is running you or if you're running your schedule. Um, I'd be real curious to hear how some of us are managing on the day to day.
So, we've talked about what we need to be doing in the pause with this assessment, these questions that we can ask ourselves. So we need to start shifting some things now. So what are some things, some actions that we can start taking to move the needle to, be a little bit more spontaneous, to make sure we're being deliberate about leaving that space for breathing? What you got, Nuge?
Well, I think, as I said, looking at your calendar and planning some things or injecting in your calendar some time to just breathe, some things that just, matter to you. Schedule some unscheduled time out of your work week, right? A 2 hour window, a 3 hour window, maybe it's on a Saturday, maybe it's on a weekday in the afternoon if you're fortunate enough to, have a role where you can do that. But don't plan in that space, right?
Mhm.
But the key though, I think, is once you do that, to actually follow through on it, to allow yourself um, to be able to take that time for yourself.
When I'm coaching folks in the workplace, this is one of the most challenging concepts for people to actually execute on. I've sat and I've said this exact thing to more folks than I can count. It's like, all right, well, if you're feeling overwhelmed, before you even get into the week, why don't you put some focus time on the calendar so that you can be uninterrupted? You can actually get things done, or you can be creative. You can do whatever you need to do, but follow through on not allowing anything else to encroach on that time. And you would think it's simple because these folks are used to living by that Outlook calendar or this is not a Microsoft commercial, what other mail app, calendar app you use. But they're used to living by that calendar, yet and still there's such a stigma around being spontaneous that it's so hard for them to follow through.
Yeah, and I think, it depends too on the work environment that you have. Because as I look back, there's a lot of conversation about, I think you can remember this. When did this come out? Maybe in the 90s, aging myself there. But this whole thing about, work-life balance, right? It was a good conversation to have in private. But then when you actually tried to do that, then folks, and sometimes even your boss would look at you cross-eyed if you were trying to, implement some of the balance part of that whole work-life balance piece. And so I think some of that has followed us over time, and we still have that feeling that if we do that, it's going to be perceived, it's going to be negatively perceived. And so I think people have to be taught, or some people have to be taught, that it's actually okay, and they have to be made, to feel comfortable that it's okay versus the opposite. I just remember that so vividly, that was a huge conversation about, work-life balance. But then when you try to do it, it's like, why do we have that conversation? Because you want to put another 5 things on my calendar, right? So, but it's just something that has to be managed, and hopefully folks have a good relationship with their peers and a good relationship with their superiors in the workplace to be able to manage that. So, consider doing that. And then just a small thing during the week. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to start big. Start small, right? Start small. Do small things that will break up your normal habit of your day. For instance, if you are driving to work, and I know this is probably something common, you have a route that you take to work and you take the same route to work every day. Well, what about going a different way to work? What about going a different way home? And maybe you feel too stressed to do it on your way to work, but you could probably do it on your way home. So, just little things like that you can do to kind of help you get into the habit of thinking of yourself and giving yourself permission to enjoy a few minutes in the day that is, completely under your control and is completely for you, right? I think about working out. I know there's a lot of people who think, well, I don't have time to work out, but making that time to work out has a whole lot more benefit than not working out. You think about how good you feel. Think about the last time you worked out and you really felt good, right? Carry that feeling through and figure out how you can, schedule that workout.
Yeah. And I think I've said this before on the podcast, saying that I don't have time for that is not a true statement. Saying I don't have time to, block out focus time on my calendar. Or I don't have time to try a new route. That's not a true statement. The true statement is it's not important enough for me to make time. That's really what the statement is. And that's where the shift has to happen, where we have to give elevated priority to these things if we want to see them manifest.
And I would say what Frankie just said is something that you need to make a mental note of. If you haven't written it down already, write it down. When he said, the fact is you don't think it's important enough, but it is important enough and you are worthy. So follow Frankie's words and consider yourself important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the last things we were going to talk about in terms of being able to kind of break out of that, that calendar trap or being stuck with too much structure is, trust your gut. We talked about intuition and that gut feeling and all the research around there. Sometimes it's hard. So how about, like you said, starting small? The next time we're trying to figure out, all right, well, what are we going to watch on TV? Or what are we going to eat for dinner? Or some small decision. Instead of just sitting there and stewing on it and stewing on it and stewing on it, give yourself 5 seconds. Like, all right, I got 5 seconds to make this decision. Whatever I decide in 5 seconds is what we're doing. Just try it out. Something that's low risk, small impact. But again, going back to our habits conversation, getting in those reps kind of builds those muscles, builds those neural pathways. So it'll be even easier the next time.
So true, sir. So very true. All right. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to remind our listeners that the psychological flexibility that you have, I mean, that's really your superpower, right? You have the ability to be flexible, to be spontaneous. And I mean, think about a tree, right? Think about a tree is, in its visual form is pretty rigid. And when the wind blows, you think about some of the branches break and they snap. And then you think about, flexible tree like a palm tree, for instance. I mean, those things will bend quite a ways before they snap. So they can take a lot more stress before they break. And so you have that flexibility that you can build into your day. And just know that you are worthy. You are absolutely worthy
Yes.
to make those kinds of decisions and to take some time for yourself. You just have to, as Frankie said, deem it important enough to follow through on.
Absolutely. And as we close the conversation, one of the things I really want to revert back to is the notion of balance. We have structure and we have spontaneity. And those things have to be able to live together. They can coexist. They must coexist, because if we go too far to either side of that spectrum, it's going to lead us off the path that we want to be on, or lead us away from the goal that we're ultimately trying to achieve.
All right. So everybody, I want you to drop a yes in the comments if you're going to leave some space on your calendar this week for you. Don't just leave space on your calendar. Leave space specifically. Be intentional about leaving space for you, and then follow through on that calendar commitment, because that is your calendar commitment for you, that you are important enough to make and that you are worthy enough to take that time for yourself.
Do it.
Frankie, what do you got to say as we close out here?
Prioritize self. I mean, so many of us have to give so much of ourselves in the pursuit of goals that are not our own, in the pursuit of taking care of other people around us, the people that we love, the people that we're responsible for. Prioritize self in that, I'm not saying shirk those responsibilities, but elevate self-care and the time you need to at least be equal with those other things that you're devoting your capacity, yourself, your energy to.
Absolutely. As you go through this week, I just want you to remember those things. And before we sign off, as always, Frankie's going to let everybody know, those of you who are new, especially to this podcast, where you can find us and join in on some of the previous conversations and what might be coming up next.
Yes, indeed. So again, all things PSI Effect Podcast related, go to our website. This is psipod.com, and there you'll find links to all of our episodes on all the different podcast platforms. So Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, I bet you the PSI Effect Podcast is available there. If you find one that you'd like to use and we're not available, message us and let us know, and we'll see if we can get our content out there for you. Also, we record every session and post videos on YouTube. You can search the PSI Effect Podcast on YouTube or use our handle at This Is PSI Pod to see full video of our episodes. And that is also our handle for social media. We do shorts on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all at our handle at This Is PSI Pod. We'll see you out there.
Perfect. So no reason why you can't find us. So go out there and take care of that as you go through this week. Just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. So go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect Podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.